Welcome to Ubuntu Mastery. This is where we stop installing Ubuntu the tutorial way and start installing it the production way. Lesson 1 is foundational because every choice you make in the installer echoes for the next 5 years of that server's life. We'll cover the 2 installers and when to pick each, a partition layout with LVM that gives us snapshots and rollback later, minimal packages, and a short post-install checklist that leaves you with a clean SSH-ready base. So let's start with the first decision. Which installer? Ubuntu Server ships with 2, and they produce identical systems. The difference is how you get there. Live Server is the TUI you click through in about 15 minutes, ideal for one-off VMs, and exactly what we'll use today to learn. Auto install is YAML in cloud-init format. 5 minutes, unattended, git versioned, byte identical every time. The rule is simple. Live Server for 1 to 5 hosts. Auto install the moment you'd want to clone what you just built. Since we're learning today, we'll take the Live Server path. Grab the ISO, verify the SA256, always no exceptions, and boot it. What you're looking at is the entire installer distilled, 10 screens and only 3 really demand thought. Storage gets its own slide because the default guided layout will hurt you later. SSH setup is the lifesaver. Import your GitHub keys right there, and you'll never type a password into this box. And snaps, select none. We're building a minimal base, not a desktop. Here's where the guided installer fails you. 1 giant root partition, no LVM, no room to maneuver. This layout fixes that. EFI and boot stay outside LVM. Boot has to be reachable before the volume manager loads. And everything else goes into VG0 as logical volumes. Separate root, var, home, and swap means a runaway container log fills var, not your whole system. And notice the 10 gigs left free in the volume group. That's snapshot headroom for Lesson 9's backups and Lesson 22's dist upgrade rollback. Today's 10 minutes of layout work buys you 5 years of options. Now, doing that partition dance by hand once is fine. Doing it on 50 hosts is malpractice. That's where auto-install earns its keep. 1 YAML file committed to Git becomes the single source of truth for every server you ever build. Notice the choices baked in. LVM with scaled sizing, SSH keys only with password login disabled, an explicitly empty snaps list, and UFW enabled before the box even finishes its first boot. Point a fresh ISO at this URL, walk away, and 5 minutes later, you've got a host identical to every other one in the fleet. With the disk laid out, let's talk about what's actually running on the box. Ubuntu's minimal install is close, but not quite there. Keep the essentials, OpenSH, Crony, UFW, cloud-init, and unattended upgrades, because every one of them has a job in a later lesson. Snap's a judgment call, useful if you're running Ubuntu Pro, deadweight otherwise. But popularity contest, a port, and the MOTD add packages, purge them on day 1. Your server doesn't need to phone home, and your SSH login banner isn't a billboard. So the installer's done, the box reboots, SSH answers, and you are absolutely not finished. 5 quick tasks lock the foundation in. Set a real host name so Ansible and your logs have something to grab onto. Pin the time zone and get Crony syncing so certificates and audit trails actually line up. And, critically in this order, allow port 22 in USW before you enable the firewall, or you'll lock yourself out on the first try. Then a full apt upgrade with a reboot for any new kernel, and optionally attach Ubuntu Pro for live patch and ESM. 10 minutes of work that pays back every week for the next 5 years. Now let's back up for a second and talk about which Ubuntu you should actually be downloading, because picking wrong here costs you hours later. For this course, it's Ubuntu Server, Live ISO, no auto install. That's the interactive installer perfect for lab VMs and one-off boxes. Desktop drags in GNOME and Snap Firefox you don't want on a server. Cloud images are great when AWS or Azure hands them to you. Core is its own immutable world for IoT, and minimal is really a container-based layer. Server is the only flavor designed headless from day 1. Start anywhere else, and you'll spend more time ripping things out than you would have spent installing clean. Now, if you're not installing into a lab VM but spinning up a real cloud instance, you skip the ISO conversation entirely. AWS, Hetzner, DigitalOcean, they all hand you a pre-baked Ubuntu image and ask one question. Got any cloud-init user data? And that user data is the same YAML dialect as auto-install, just leaner. What you see here is a production-grade drop-in, an Ansible user with an ed25519 key, root and password auth disabled, the essentials installed, UFW locked to port 22, 90 seconds from launch to Ansible ready. Paste it once, your whole fleet boots identical. Before we wrap, the scars. 5 mistakes that bite every Ubuntu admin at least once. Default use entire disk kills your snapshot story in lesson 22. Snap Firefox bloats a headless server. Missing SSH keys turn a cloud VM into a paperweight. UTC-only timestamps make incident reviews a math exercise. And FWW enable before allow 22. That's the classic same-second lockout. 15 minutes of care at install time saves you a rebuild down the line. So here's the foundation you've laid in lesson 1. 2 installers and knowing when each one wins, a partition layout with LVM and room for snapshots, a minimal package set, a 5-step post-install drill, cloud-init for VMs in 90 seconds, and the right Ubuntu flavor for the job. 6 skills, 1 production-grade base. Next up in lesson 2, apt and snap deep dive, sources, pins, holds, the atomic update model, and when each tool earns its place. Lesson 1 is in the books. Your host is installed, partitioned sensibly, and locked down with keys. Lesson 2 is where things get interesting. We crack open the 2 package layers that define every Ubuntu server. Sources, pinning, holds, snap refresh policies, and the honest trade-offs of each. Load it up when you're ready, and I'll see you in lesson 2.